finally, we're going to start with Peter Hudis' presentation. And so Peter is going to give a presentation on the present situation, the latest updates in the situation in Gaza and the surrounding territory, and some background on the history. And then we're going to have a discussion on that. And then in the second hour, we're going to go to a discussion of the action proposal that we have circulated, which is to have coordinated escalating disruptions of the war machine and the defense industry and transportation and arms transportation in order to mobilize to get a ceasefire in Gaza and other demands. So let me go ahead, and Peter, why don't you introduce yourself and start your presentation? I have to make you a co-host, which I will do so now. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you everybody for being able to be here for this very important discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing your views and back and forth that we have. Peter Hudis, I'm a professor of philosophy at Oakton College, which is right outside of Chicago. I'm also a member of the International Marxist Humanist Organization. It's very clear that 4 months since the start of Israel's war against the Palestinian people, a war that long precedes October 7th, the genocide being implemented against the population of Gaza is reaching an unimaginable level. As if 30,000 dead and tens of thousands wounded and close to 90% of Gaza's population of 2.2 million displaced was not enough, Israel is now planning to lay waste to Rafah, one of the last areas not completely destroyed, more or less, by Israeli air and ground forces, where over 1 million people are crowded into 25 square miles with nowhere to go. Israel is proclaiming, just most recently, its plan, I put that in scare quotes, for civilians fleeing Rafah to be set up in 15 camps with 25,000 tents per camp, running from the southern edge of Gaza City to the Al-Mawasi area north of Rafah. Assuming 4 people in a tent, a minimum number, that would mean 100,000 Palestinians per camp, 15 of them. Gaza before the war was an open-air prison. Today, this will make Gaza into an open-air concentration camp. Indeed, an open-air death camp. And who is Israel expecting to fund this operation of this vast concentration camp complex? The United States and its Middle Eastern allies. This is how Israel so-called protects civilian populations. No one believes, of course, that Israel would delay bombing Rafah into smithereens until such camps are built, if they ever are. It's already killing hundreds daily in this area alone. And the U.S., which is arming and funding this carnage, has not stopped, as I think everybody here knows, has not stopped $1 or 1 bomb from going to Israel since the conflict following October 7th happened. So never clearly has it become more urgent to stop Israel from continuing this carnage, which clearly fits every definition of genocide. Over 2 million Gazans are facing malnutrition and even outright starvation, disease from the destruction of the hospitals, sewage systems, water systems, adequate shelter, etc., and not to mention the continuous shelling and fighting, bombing from Israeli ground and air forces. Tens of thousands are clearly going to die in the next months more if this is not stopped, which is what makes advancing the series of demands that were crafted for this meeting, which includes a ceasefire but goes beyond that in terms of stopping any aid of all forms to Israel, is so essential. Despite Israel's enormous firepower, it's dropped 25,000 bombs on Gaza so far. It cannot win this confrontation with Hamas. It has no real strategy other than to displace and kill as many Palestinians as possible. Netanyahu's claim that the war will not end until Hamas is eliminated is a fool's errand. Hamas has been deeply embedded for years in Gazan Palestinian society. After playing a major role in the first and second intifadas, it won the Palestinian legislation elections of 2006, getting 45.2% of the vote and 74 of the 132 seats in the Palestinian legislature. Israel and the US, of course, responded by placing an embargo on Gaza, but Hamas proceeded to present itself as the face of resistance in contrast to the compromised and corrupt Palestinian Authority. Hardly a democratic force, it has ruled Gaza with an iron fist ever since, but it is deeply embedded in the population. It is not some kind of military formation that is alien to it and simply be extracted out. All this means is that Hamas cannot be eliminated by reducing Gaza to rubble. Not to mention, of course, that Hamas has many supporters in the West Bank and in the diaspora. Recent events make this clear, by the way. After 4 months of war, you might have noticed that just about 10 days ago, Hamas was able to fire about a dozen missiles at a time towards Tel Aviv. Even with all of Israel's aerial surveillance and tens of thousands of troops on the ground in an area not much larger than the size of Manhattan. And Hamas is now operating openly again in the streets of Gaza City, after Israel had announced weeks ago that it had cleared the area of any Hamas fighters. Even if Israel kills all of the 30,000 Hamas fighters that some specialists say are still around, perhaps as many as 10,000 have been killed, we don't know exactly, it will not be able to subdue Gaza, since thousands more will rise up sooner or later to take their place. And increasingly, this is something that even many Israelis are beginning to wake up to. This is why members of Netanyahu's government have openly called for Gazans to be expelled into Sinai and or transferred to other Arab countries. I use that euphemism, of course, with a lot of sarcasm. Israel's foreign minister told the EU not long ago, presented this idea to a EU meeting of building an artificial island off the coast in order to house Gazans expelled from Palestinians expelled from Gaza. That such an insane proposal could even be voiced with only the mildest objections from the EU members present, let alone the United States, shows how degenerate Israel and its supporters have become. Of course, such plans to deport Palestinians to some man-made island that doesn't exist in the middle of the Mediterranean isn't going anywhere. No more feasible is Netanyahu's desire, at least, to send the Palestinians that he doesn't kill into Sinai. There is no chance of that. Egypt will not permit it, but not because Egypt Sisi loves Palestinians, but because he hates Hamas as much as Israel does. Hamas was formed as a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1987. It's maintained close ties with this offshoot since, and of course has close ties with Iran, which is an adversary of Egypt Sisi. The last thing Sisi wants is for the Islamic fundamentalists supportive of Hamas to end up in Egypt, even a small number of them, even potentially, where he has been battling militias connected to offshoots of the Brotherhood since it tossed them out of power via a military coup over a decade ago. So what option for victory, so-called, does Israel have, especially since it has refrained from sending massive numbers of troops? It sent large numbers, but not massive numbers, into the 500-mile series of tunnels running underneath Gaza, because Israel knows very much that this could turn out to be Israel's Stalingrad, since it knows that those tunnels, fighting man-to-man in those tunnels, gives Hamas a distinct military advantage. Anxious not to get vested in fighting in the tunnels, therefore, Israel continues to bomb and shell from above, as well as demolitions by troops from ground level, even though this ensures, by the way, that more Israeli hostages will be killed by its own military. So far, Israel, this great, wonderful IDF, has managed to only free 3 Israeli hostages, the same number, incidentally, that got killed in one instance a month ago by Israeli soldiers themselves when they opened fire on their own people. Frankly, it was clear from the first day of the war, and I wrote something on the on October 8th, which actually said this, that freeing the hostages was not and would not be a priority for Israel or Netanyahu. That is all lip service. As you know, Netanyahu has cut off negotiations to free more hostages because he wants the war to go on as long as possible. Its political survival depends upon it. Now, if this not be madness, then what is? And what explains the support for this within Israel? I want to share with you a email I just got a few days ago from a friend of mine who has been long active in the Women in Black organization in Jerusalem, who has been involved with her other feminist colleagues in active solidarity with Palestine for many, many years, and who have suffered all kinds of indignities and jail sentences and everything else as a result of their actions. Here's what she wrote to me, quote, quoting her, "Things in Israel are very bad indeed. There is a crackdown on dissent as well as overarching sense of fascism. Friends and comrades are randomly be taken into police custody for social media posts and or public statements in solidarity with Gaza. And it's always a struggle trying to bridge between effective organizing and sustaining integrity. I try not to despair that the public sentiment is so much pro-war, but it's honestly very hard. People who had decent politics on the left," she's referring to, on the left, "have gone 150% jingoistic and militaristic," end quote. I believe that now I'm speaking for myself now, what's driving so many Israelis inside and outside of the government to support such madness is the realization that October 7th showed that the assumption they had been making for years, that the struggle of the Palestinian people for self-determination was a thing of the past and that could now be completely ignored, was totally shattered. For years, many Israelis, indeed most Israelis, took it for granted that the Palestinian struggle had been defeated and was no longer an issue to worry about, never to be a serious threat again. Yes, of course, once every few years there would be a blow up of Hamas, but the idea was Israel would then cut the grass, as it were, with a bombing campaign, and the world would quickly forget and get on with business as usual. The settlements would continue to be built in the West Bank, and strangling Gaza to death would continue to go on unimpeded. And at least on a surface level, it's kind of seemed to make sense. After all, by last fall, it looked like Saudi Arabia would be signing on to the Abraham Accords and recognize Israel's, without Israel making a single concession to Palestinians and Palestinian rights. And with the US, as usual, doing nothing to stop the growth of the Jewish settlements on the West Bank, pretty much soon the idea was, among many Israelis at least, that any resistance there too will be quelled. Now, whatever one thinks of what happened on October 7th, I am, for one, not a fan of taking elderly people and children as hostages, etc. But nevertheless, whatever one makes of October 7th, it is clear that October 7th shattered the illusion forevermore that the plight of the Palestinian people can be silenced or ignored. Moreover, Israel now faces not only the resistance in Gaza and the West Bank, but the risk that the fighting with Hezbollah in Lebanon could lead to a full-scale war. Hezbollah, of course, armed with 150,000 missiles, far more accurate than anything Hamas has, supported by Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, as well as, of course, the Houthis in Yemen. Now, while the last thing Iran wants is a war with Israel, it has long been willing instead to let its proxies die for the last Palestinian. It isn't out of the question that it could be pushed into jumping in as well. So what does all this mean for Palestine? Unless a permanent ceasefire can be forced upon Israel and all, and I emphasize all, US, EU military and economic aid is cut off, the war will continue. And that's what we have to try to promote. Now, there's definitely a positive ally or positive force that's on the scene today that has emerged, perhaps expectedly, perhaps unexpectedly, depending on your point of view, in response to this genocide that's occurring. And that is the massive protests we've been seeing around the world, but particularly in the United States, in support of Palestine and against the genocide that is continuously ongoing by Israel day to day. And frankly, from my vantage point in Chicago, we've never seen anything like this. We're getting protests at rallies, sit-ins, all kinds of campaigns. I wouldn't say every week. I would say 5 times a week on average. We've been having protests in downtown Manhattan that have drawn 25,000 people at a time, shutting down Lakeshore Drive, shutting down Michigan Avenue, the central business district. There's been groups like Jewish Voice for Peace that have occupied the Board of Trade and shut it down for 24 hours. There's been a protest at City Hall, which shut down City Hall for a day, of hundreds and hundreds of people from various political directions, etc. What we've seen is a whole generation of young people flooding into political activism for the first time. I've been attending Zoom organizing meetings of some of the various protests and whatnot. And I walk into a Zoom organizing session, and there's 300 people on the Zoom call. And I'm not going to give away my age. I'm not as young as I look, but as I like to say, but I'm at least twice the age of anybody in the room. The average age is about 23. Okay, maybe younger than that. And this is people who are coming into politics, coming in now into left politics, galvanized precisely by responding to this genocide in real life, unfolding right in front of them on a daily basis before their eyes. You probably know that this culminated in the vote in the Chicago City Council last week. Vote was 24-23 to call for a ceasefire, an immediate permanent ceasefire. It was a huge victory, even if it's a symbolic one. The vote was the 23-23 was a tie vote within the City Council. Mayor Brandon Washington, who is somebody who has came into power with a lot of support, by the way, from Palestinian activists, cast a deciding vote in solidarity with the ceasefire resolution, coming under a lot of attack now from the liberals and the right wing in the city because of it. So there is movement that is occurring, and we're even seeing this in the fake efforts of Biden and Blinken to pretend that they're pressuring Netanyahu. They realize that their base of support is within the left of the Democratic Party is disappearing. There's no chance of them getting a sliver of the Arab American vote, which is what delivered Michigan to Biden in the 2020 election. They're running a bit scared. That doesn't mean they've done anything in response that's substantial. But the point of the matter is something new has emerged in these protests. And I'm just talking from the vantage point of Chicago. Those from other parts of the country and other parts of the world that are here can chime in with what's happening on the ground from where you're at. And as we know, it's precisely because of this groundswell that the far right and the Republican far right and the corporate Democrats, which includes many liberals, are responding to all of this by invoking a new McCarthyism to silence any critics of Zionism with a charge of anti-Semitism. The new issue of Against the Current is coming out today or tomorrow that has a piece by me on this question of the challenging the weaponization of anti-Semitism. I would argue that this kind of coalescence of the far right and the liberals and the centrists in trying to demonize anyone criticizing Israel with the charge of anti-Semitism is not a sign of their strength. It's an act of desperation, born from a sense on their part that Israel and the Zionists are losing the battle for the minds of humanity. So we are living through, I think, what's beginning to be a radical sea change, at least in the United States, especially among young people, regarding attitudes towards Israel and Palestine. The last poll I saw was that 66% of the public in the United States supports a ceasefire. That's a good first step, certainly not the last one. And that's a radical change from what we saw even a few months ago. And I think that this kind of pressures from below is going to be continuing. So I want to finish with a few comments just briefly on some challenges this poses to revolutionary socialists. That is, what basic principles guide our approach to Palestinian solidarity that distinguishes ourselves from those who are not revolutionary socialists. So I'll just mention a few of them. First, we support Palestinian struggle for national self-determination against the colonialist and imperialist settler state that practices racism and apartheid without reservation. Second, we support the rights of Palestinians to seek arms for wherever they can obtain them, including if they get them from authoritarian capitalist regimes. That is not, it's an option that they have, and it's an option that we have to be able to defend in terms of solidarizing with the resistance. Third, support for the Palestinian struggle in no way, shape, or form involves supporting the political perspectives of the groups that for now are prominent within them, such as Hamas, which is an Islamic fundamentalist group that supports capitalism. As Joseph Dahar, the Syrian revolutionary activist and thinker, recently wrote in Tempest, I quote Joseph's comment here, he said, quote, Hamas, just like other Palestinian political parties, such as Fatah, does not look to the Palestinian masses and the regional working classes and oppressed peoples as the forces to win liberation. Instead, they seek political alliances with the regime's ruling classes, such as in Syria, Iran, and Qatar, and their regimes to support their political and military battles against Israel, end quote. What always results when political tendencies refrain from opposing capitalist class society is that they neglect or downplay the need to form alliances with the social forces within all existing capitalist regimes that can bring the system down. But there's nothing that prevents us from firmly adhering to this independent critical position while opposing Israeli genocide and supporting the issue to support the struggles against it, which of course includes issue preventing all aid from going to Israel most and most immediately. For those of us in the U.S., that's so crucial. So to conclude, as I see it, speaking as a member of the International Marxist Humanist Organization, and also I should mention the Ukraine Solidarity Network, which I'm a founding member of, Revolutionary Socialists organized this here in the U.S. These principles do not only pertain to Palestine, they pertain to all struggles for national liberation, whether Palestine, Ukraine, or elsewhere. I support the Ukrainian people's struggle for national self-determination against Russia's neo-colonial invasion and occupation, and their right to obtain arms for wherever they can. But we do not support, and I do not support, Zelensky's neoliberal government, which is imposing structural adjustment policies against the Ukrainian working class right in the midst of their battle against Russian imperialism. If the Ukrainian struggle loses, we all lose. If the Palestinian struggle loses, we all lose. We have to make sure we don't lose. And that begins by getting our governments to stop funding, arming, and covering ideologically for the genocide being committed against Palestine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. But before we start the discussion, you did not introduce yourself, and I didn't introduce you. So could you just briefly introduce yourself?
I thought I had, but I'll say it. You want me to say a few more words?
Oh, all right.
I mean, I could say a little bit. You might know that I'm also
okay.
I'm author of a number of books. I don't have to go through them, but one project I do want to mention, Sally knows about this as well as others, and of course, Eric, you do too. I'm the general editor of the complete works of Rosa Luxemburg. We're planning on publishing a 17 or 18 volume complete works, 16 pages a volume. We've got the first five volumes out. The fifth volume is coming out any day now. And I did a piece in Jacobin that you might want to look at just on Jacobin Online a few days ago on some new, about 200 pages of her writings in Polish on Southern Africa that were not known of before, that were written in 1904. And so solidarity with the Namibian struggle, the Namur and Herero struggle against German imperialism, in which I connected to the opposition to Israeli genocide against Palestine. There's interesting parallels between what Luxemburg was talking about and what we're seeing on the ground today.
Okay, thank you. All right. So why don't we just open it up for discussion, and basically we'll carry the discussion on until 10 past. We did get started a little later. So Steve, again, at the moment, this is a discussion on the situation, the action proposals we're going to discuss after 110. But anyway, Steve is first.
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for the report. I think that what was left out of the report is what the working class in the United States and internationally should be doing about the genocide in Gaza. And one thing that is not mentioned is the role of Zionism. That we have a Zionist trade union bureaucracy in the United States, the AFL-CIO, which has been blocking, for example, even discussion about actions supporting the Palestinians in the San Francisco Labor Council. The AFL-CIO has sent out notices to state federations and labor councils that they can't talk about that because they support the Zionist regime. And I think that Italian dockers, Belgium transport workers, and others are taking action. And I think that's what we need to focus on, working class action internationally against the Zionist regime and against the accomplices, U.S. imperialism. That's critical. And I think that our call for an International Day of Action on the 24th at all U.S. military bases is a way of direct action against the U.S., which is the major supporter of the Zionist regime. And I'm kind of surprised you left that out because the United States, Britain, the imperialist regimes are in the Red Sea, bombing Yemen, bombing other countries, Iraq, Syria, to basically crush any opposition to the Zionist regime. So this is a question of war, imperialist war in the Middle East, which we have to talk about in the working class. We have a pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist trading bureaucracy, which is justifying what the United States is doing and doing damage control for it. And I think that means a political struggle in the working class and the unions. That's what we've begun. I'm going to put our statement up for the action on the 24th. But I think workers are angry. I agree with you that this is the largest mass protest of workers actually since the 60s. In the Bay Area, workers, over 400 healthcare workers from all different unions are organizing Signal, using social media to get information out and cross union lines, and they're having actions every day, protests, that kind of thing. So there's a activism in the working class and the unions, but I think it has to be focused politically for action by the working class against the Zionist regime, and also demanding that the unions actually take direct action of solidarity with the Palestinians and against the U.S. military machine.
But as I say, the whole second hour of this meeting is going to be devoted to concrete discussions of action proposals. So we certainly are going to be discussing that. Another comment, Madeline. Comments or questions?
Yeah, I just wanted Peter, if he could, to repeat what he said about the so-called safe places that Israel was creating. I know that they're unlikely to actually work or be created, but I wanted to have those figures. He went very fast over them, and I couldn't get them down. Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. If I can just say a word. By the way, this is really more of a sop that I think Netanyahu is throwing to get Biden to not be on his tail so much, on his back so much. But what they're talking about doing, this is a ridiculous notion, is instead of 15 tent camps, 15 massive camps of tents, 25,000 tents per camp, running from southern Gaza City right up to the area just north of Rafah, would constitute about 100,000 Palestinians per camp, multiplied by 15 gives you what? 1.5 million people living in these incredibly concentrated, living literally right on top of each other. And I think that that's pretty obvious what that would be even if they can pull off something like that, which I don't think they're even interested, frankly, in doing. Even if they did that, it's an open air concentration camp of the most horrendous thing.
And where would those be built? Along the coast?
Yes, basically along the coast, running roughly from the southern edge of Gaza City to the Al Mawasi area north of Rafah. Yeah. So it's going to be from north to south.
Yeah, I'm ridiculous, totally ridiculous. But thank you for for providing that information. It makes everything even more ridiculous. I mean, it strengthens. Never mind. But thank you for that. It's ridiculous.
Okay. Day Spencer.
Yeah, hi. I just had a question about kind of the bigger picture. Why do you think that Iran doesn't want to get involved in a war with Israel? I mean, is it because of the whole thing with the United States? And I don't know, anybody can answer that, or Peter.
Since you already heard from me, it's probably best to go around, and I might make a few comments at the very end to respond to a question or two, but we got to hear from others.
We'll get back to Peter. Other comments? Questions? Well, I just have a comment on the military situation. While it's obvious that Israel has demonstrated the ability with American-made bombs to pretty much flatten all of Gaza and all of the living quarters and infrastructure that supports the civilian population, they've actually done amazingly poorly against the armed forces of Hamas, considering the imbalance in the military power. I think that it's extremely unlikely that the casualties that Israel has claimed among Hamas is anywhere near true, because there's one thing about Hamas that we know is that all of their fighters are men. They don't permit women among their combat elements. And the Gaza Health Ministry has been reporting the number of men and women killed and children killed. And the proportion of adult men killed has been running very, very little above the proportion of men in the civilian population, which is 25% of the population in Gaza are adult males. So by simple arithmetic that I've been doing, it seems unlikely that more than 1,000 or 2,000 Hamas militants have been killed since the invasion of Gaza, in addition to the approximately 1,000 that were killed during the October 7th combat in Israel itself. So it's very clear, and of course this must be known to the Israeli leadership, apart from what they actually say. It's very clear that they know, and some of the military have stated, that it is impossible for them to militarily eliminate the Hamas fighters, not just the Hamas movement, but just the armed 30 or 40,000 Hamas fighters. So it is very clear that the Netanyahu, the dominant faction in the government, is simply aimed at getting rid of the Gaza population, which they feel that they have a chance of doing if they're not stopped, because they have a chance of essentially starving people to death and setting off mass epidemics. So it's very clear that this is not primarily, even for the Israeli government, a battle between the IDF and the Hamas fighters. It's a battle between the IDF and the civilian population of Gaza, and to a large extent of West Bank. Okay, so any further discussion? Well, why don't we go back to Peter then? Why don't you reply to the direct question from Day?
Markar had his hand up.
What?
Markar had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't understand why I don't.
I just put it up. I didn't put that. Yeah. I have a question.
Excuse me, Marker.
Yeah.
With 19 people, I can't see all your images. It's not set up this way. So
No problem.
You do have to use the little the yellow hand. But anyway, go ahead, Marker.
Yeah. I have a question here. I wonder if anyone can help me with. Most of the genocides that take place, people are killed not with bullets, bombs, and bayonets, but by famine and disease. Right. I wonder if anyone has any sources I can go to or any information about the Palestinians. I know it's going to be difficult to get this, very, very difficult, but even a rough estimate, how many Palestinians have died so far? We're talking about the most vulnerable, children, pregnant women, and so forth. How many? Do we have any idea? Do we have any idea where to go to find out how many Palestinians, in addition to the 28,000 or whatever, in addition to that, how many have died from famine, disease, exposure?
Okay, Peter, why don't you respond to the two direct questions from Day and Marker?
These are two great questions. I really don't know the answer, Markos, to yours, and if anybody has any, it would be very difficult, of course, to know that. The ones who would with the UNWR, which is, of course, what the United States wants to shut down and Israel wants to shut down. But I imagine that they must have some sort of a sense of this. So if anybody knows what they're saying on that, that might be a way to get to that question. Just on Dave, that's a really great question. The Iranian, there's a lot involved, but just very briefly, the Iranian regime is a very unstable regime at the moment. It's facing a lot of problems. The economy is sinking. There's widespread popular discontent with the levels of corruption, etc. Living standards are dropping. There's really, really serious distress among the working classes in Iran. While people could see the Iranian government is spending enormous amounts of money on weaponry, including sending it to Putin to attack Ukrainian civilians, etc. But the most important thing that shows the weakness of the regime is for the last year and a half, there's been this massive protest movement in Iran, forcefully suppressed by killing about 5,000 people so far. But the regime is walking carefully because they realize that this had massive popular support among women, among national minorities, among Kurds. There was a number of groups within the oil workers and others within certain industries in Iran that tried to express or did express in some one way or another solidarity with this campaign that was generated largely by issues concerning feminism, but went beyond that or included many more issues besides that. So the regime feels itself in a very vulnerable position. And the last thing it would want, I would think, is a full-scale war with the United States, which a war with Israel would become a war with the United States inevitably. I think we're all aware of that, which doesn't mean they won't get drawn into the war or won't jump in at a certain point if they feel it's in their interests. But they don't really feel, why would they need to when they've got proxies in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, etc., to create a lot of havoc for the Israelis. And not to mention, of course, their prized access, Hezbollah. And that's the main thing. That is their prize. Look, it was Hezbollah that helped put down the revolt against the Assad regime in Syria, right? And that is their prized asset in the Middle East. The last thing they want to see is Hezbollah get severely undermined by an outbreak of a regional war that would not only involve Israel attacking Hezbollah, but also the United States. So they would prefer to keep their cards, as the saying goes, closer to their chest. At least that's what my Iranian friends tell me.
Yeah, Marker, I can comment. I have been following the United Nations and other sources on the casualties.
Yeah.
So the source of the casualty information is the Gaza Health Organization. They don't distinguish in that 28,000 between cause of death. They're probably unable to. It's hard enough for them to keep track of the immense amount of deaths being caused. So any deaths due to famine and disease would be thrown into that 28,000. What the Gaza Health Organization says they do not know is what's happening in northern Gaza, because in the part of Gaza north of the wadi, I forget its name, there is no health organization left. There is a total absence of health infrastructure, both in the area that Israel still physically occupies and in the area that they temporarily or permanently evacuated. So no one really knows what's going on, except they know that the famine is most severe in the north because the Israelis have been intercepting about half of the very limited number of supply missions, convoys to that northern area. So there's almost no supply of food. People are eating, weeds. So the level of famine there is obviously intense, but whether that is starting to lead to deaths from malnutrition or disease, especially among children, nobody really knows. That could be happening right now, but there's no access to that area for the health people. we can say from past experience with famine is that epidemic disease could break out at any day. Obviously, we have, a viral population in the world that has been strengthened by the COVID epidemic. Viruses trade genetic information and become more infectious. So, and we know that viruses do better from the virus point of view with people who have been weakened by starvation. So this is really a bomb that could explode at any time, which adds to the urgency of our work. So let me give a last call. Oh, Peter, you want to add?
There was a question from a point that Sally made in the chat that might be worth addressing
Okay, let me scroll down.
about the Arab Spring returning.
Okay, and Tagri said many in the South are calling me asking for help to get them food. Of course, there's a shortage of food throughout the entire Gaza, extreme shortage of food. I was just saying that it seems to be most extreme for the North. Okay.
No, I agree with you.
Tagri also said,
Yeah. Sorry.
okay.
No,
Speak
I
for
agree
yourself,
with
Tagri.
you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, fine.
Yeah. No, the North is starving, and I receive many messages from the North asking for food, but nobody can get them anything. So they are left abandoned without any United Nations organizations to help. So they are really like in a very, very serious problem. Also, all of a sudden now in Rafah, many people are also asking for food. So their situation is becoming very dire as well. Now, when it comes to Israel policy, from day one, Israel's policy has been a continuation of the Nakba, that, getting the Palestinians in Gaza, 2.3 out of the Gaza Strip and pushing them to Sinai. At the beginning, Blinken went to the Arab regimes and asked them to open the border with Egypt, but Egypt and the Arab world refused that. But now, this is what Netanyahu is pushing, because this for him will be kind of a survival, politically speaking, that if he will manage to get the Palestinians to Sinai, that will be his success. But so far, Egypt is not allowing that to happen like the way he wishes. But really, it's the only thing that give us the hope is South Africa. It's so sad that South Africa came out with the hearing with the International Court of Justice, not a European or country, but it's amazing. It's very hopeful, but it's not ending. It's not imposing sanctions when it comes to weapons. And I would like to hear from you, in this regard when it comes to boycott of weapons.
Right. Okay. Let me just scroll through the additional comments. Sally, did you want to add something?
I have already typed my in the chat box, so I think that's it.
Okay.
If I could say one word about her point, is that just as Palestine was considered dead and gone by the Israeli establishment and the Zionists in general, so people, it was a common parlance throughout, including in the left, that, well, the Arab Spring of 2012, that's ancient history. But when you see the demonstrations, including in Cairo and throughout so many other parts of the Middle East, in solidarity with Palestine, it's some of the same forces that were driving the Arab Spring. And so, in a sense, this is bringing the spirit of the Arab Spring potentially back into focus, and that can have huge ramifications down the road, because it's popular opposition from below that can force the regimes in the Arab world to put up a stiffer resistance to the Israeli expansionist project.
I do want to add one problem here, though, because we, as revolutionaries, we should discuss the problems as well as the progress, is that I've been in touch with revolutionary exile groups that are in close touch with revolutionary forces in Iran. And among those, the base of those forces, there is some reluctance to get involved in the Palestinian movement because of the famous, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That is that, of course, the Iranian regime is the enemy of Israel. And since the Iranian regime is slaughtering us, the revolutionaries, maybe Israel can't be that bad. So there is some, ideological problems in the base in Iran on the question of solidarity with the Palestinians. Obviously, this must be overcome, but it is an existing problem according to them. So why don't we just go on, because the question has been raised, and the purpose of this part of the meeting is to discuss actual action proposals. So again, to review, we in the ILN put out the proposal that, given the massive amount of solidarity, mass support for a ceasefire, for the ending of the supply of weapons that is essential for Israel to continue this war. Although Israel has formidable fighter planes, weapons, tanks at their disposal, they are not producing almost any of their own ammunition. They are getting the ammunition, the bombs and shells that are doing the killing, almost exclusively from the United States and United States weapons that are stored in Europe. Most of these weapons are being transferred, by the way, without any funds associated for them. They're being transferred by the decision of President Biden, who has certain, legislated powers to send weapons that have never been paid for, to send them as whatever, as gifts. So the idea was to make this movement more effective and more powerful if we can organize coordinated and escalating week by week disruptions of the production and transport of armaments. So to the extent that the ruling class fears something, they fear the organization of the international working class. To the extent that that is emerging from this movement, that will rapidly, we hope, decrease ruling class support for this war. So that was the general idea. Now, as background, there are two events that people should all know about. One is, as Steve says, there is for next week an action planned, and Steve can elaborate on whether there are other locations, but at least for one location, which is Travis Air Force Base. So a practical question is it possible for other groups in the very short amount of time available, which is 1 week, to organize their own disruptions for that date? So I think that that's one concrete question, which is really, as I say, a practical/tactical question. Second of all, I think we really do need to discuss the other efforts to mobilize union support in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere against for a ceasefire and against the war. In particular, I have been contacted by a newly formed organization called the National Labor Network for a Ceasefire, which will be having its first general meeting online this Thursday, February 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And with a little effort, I think I can post that to the chat while other people are discussing. So basically, I'd like to open it up for discussion about what actions are possible. We need concretely to make a decision on if we are ready to fill in the blanks on the call of the International Luxemburgist Network to actually call for a specific date for the first coordinated actions. Can this be the 24th? Should it be another date further in the future? So that we have to decide, and we have to decide a date for the next organizing meeting for such a escalating project of coordinated disruption. So those are two things that really have to come out of this meeting. So given that introduction, let me open it up for a discussion on the action resolution. Don't all speak at once. Am I missing anybody? Well, let me start myself by calling on Steve, and I want to ask Steve, are there other actions planned for the 24th right now, other than the Travis Air Force Base action that you guys are involved in? Do you know of others?
Yeah, well, this,
For that day.
I have a link to the statement that has actions. There are actions going to be all over the world, in Italy, in Japan, in Argentina. It's a global day of action on the 24th. And I think our aim is to build an international movement of actions globally.
Will there be other actions in the United States?
I don't think so at this point, but it doesn't preclude people from having an action on that day at a U.S. base or maybe a recruitment facility, U.S. military recruitment facility, or
Right.
a federal building for that matter. I mean, that's it's possible to have actions internationally. The other thing is there's this Labor for Palestine should be mentioned, because that is organizing labor groups. There was a rally last weekend in Los Angeles of over a couple thousand people, trade unions and others, and there was a rally in Oakland of over 2,000 workers. And there have been actions in New York. And I think what we have to focus on, and there's going to be an educational conference on the 25th of probably 200 to 300 workers, trade unions from Northern California on the 25th in Oakland. So that's an opportunity to, talk about the role of Zionism, the fighting the unions against the union bureaucracy, which is a big obstacle for worker actions. I mean, as everyone knows here, the U.S. trade union bureaucracy is hardcore pro-Zionist, and they don't want any action from workers. They don't even want to have any discussion, which is another issue, democracy in the labor movement, and the unions to have a discussion about what is going on in Gaza and why workers' action is critical to stop it. And also the Democratic Party is obviously with the trade union bureaucracy, opposing any action politically in the United States and internationally. The ICFTU, there's been no action. In Britain, other countries which are actually supporting the Zionist regime with military. There've been some protests at military suppliers, but no action against the military itself. And I think that this growing movement in the United States right now has been focused on protests in cities, protest actions, but there has to be worker actions and also aiming at the U.S. military. We have to shut down the U.S. military machine. And I think we also have to combine that with the class struggle that's developing in the United States of workers, education workers, public workers. In the United States, there may be a public workers strike, but we have to tie the struggle to support the Palestinians and against the genocide with the class struggle in the United States against the capitalists and the trading bureaucracy who don't want to tie those together. There was a strike in Japan, in Osaka, last November, where workers went on strike in Osaka, machinery workers, and they said they were also going on strike for Palestine. And I think in the United States, where there's strikes, the California Faculty Association had a strike. We need to tie these strikes that are going on with the struggle against the war on the Palestinians and against the trillions of dollars that are being spent. That money should be going to social services, healthcare, housing in the United States. That's a good way of making a connection, I think, and concretely of workers who are in struggle here, which we have to do.
Right. I think that, one of the points of our resolution was to focus protests on the defense industry sites where we can, first of all, as both Steve and the resolution makes the point, is that the $2 trillion spent on armaments could be redirected. That actual manufacturing capability could be redirected to the housing and social services that we need. And second of all, that many of the defense factories actually are unionized, and we can work in coordination with the unions there. I might add, as I say, that it is true that some international unions have actually called for a ceasefire. And as I say, there seem to be a number of efforts for organizing ceasefire groups among labor activists, which hopefully can be tied together. But again, the question here is, are any of the groups that people are a part of in a position to, practically organize anything by the 24th? And if not, what is a practical date for a follow-up action? Obviously, it's great that this action is occurring on the 24th. It seems like a step forward. If you haven't, Steve, if you could post to the chat the website or something that lists these various actions, that would be good. Is there anything, for example, on the East Coast that could be done? Jay, any ideas here?
Here, well, I'll let Carol go first, and I'll follow up. I think, let me just say, my initial hand went up. I wanted to hear a little bit more about the action at the Travis Air Force Base, which Steve has explained, but which I think is great. And Carol is working with Steve, and if there's something going on the East Coast, I'd like to hear that. But I would like to hear more, was there, how was this arrived at? And obviously, for this movement to grow, we've got to bring in broader forces. And so is there a meeting planned to help organize future actions? What is going on with that? In New Jersey, for example, there was an action at an arms manufacturer back in December. I was not able to make contact with them, but those are kind of the groups that we're going to have to bring in for this movement to actually be forged.
Carol,
Given the fact that we've already made the connection between the lack of resources and, decent pay and all of that, with shipping $3.8 billion over to Israel every year, I don't know whether Jay is going to go, but we have a strike committee meeting at CUNY on the 22nd. And I'm definitely going to be raising, obviously, the question between the relationship between the war and our lack of pay. And so if we can, I think it's unrealistic for us to think that we can do something by the 24th. And the only massive thing that I know that's going on is the strike committee, plus, a myriad of demonstrations. But if we get information from Steve about what happened, what's happening and what happened, then we should write a coordinated flyer saying to whatever demonstrations we go on, which I go on like a million of them, and I'm sure everybody here goes on many of them, we should write a coordinated flyer about organizing, rolling strike actions or whatever it is that we want to do, shutting down military bases, shutting down Zim ships, shutting down armaments going to Israel. So we can figure out, it can't be on the 24th because that's not realistic, but we could figure out sometime in the near future and write a flyer saying this is what we're building towards. We think the working class is really the only reasonable, group of people that are capable of shutting down the war machine. So let's write that collectively, where we want the working class to shut down the war machine and give out the flyers as we go and say on the date of March, whatever, let's start organizing this, rolling action. But, as of now, other than what Steve is organizing, I think, it's not realistic, but let's move towards a date. And, after Steve lets us know how successful the Travis Air Force Base is, we can put that in our flyer that we're going to hand out, all of us collectively, to different, demonstrations that we're going to.
Well, that certainly seems a reasonable suggestion. Steve, is there a second date planned?
There are going to be other actions. The Italians, C. Cobus has already had 2 actions at military bases in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be others. So I suggest that your group endorse this and then participate internationally in discussing the next action.
So will there be a meeting? This is what Jay was asking. Is there a public meeting for planning the next action?
That I don't know, but I think we could organize a meeting in the United States of people who agree with this perspective and work to get people all over the United States. One of the interesting things about the protests, a lot of the protests, many of them have been organized by PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation. And
right.
They're not first of all, they're not interested in fighting the trade union bureaucracy over this issue. And second of all, they're not interested in going to military bases because the protests have been widespread, Houston, all over the country in the United States. So it's possible to target other U.S. military bases in the United States, particularly in the South. But in any event, what I suggest we do is following this action on the 24th, we can have a report back from different countries where actions took place and then have a discussion about how to go forward on a united front basis.
Right. I think, I'm inclined to agree with that, since I think that the sentiment is that the 24th is too soon for us to plan additional actions. that coordinate with that. So, okay, so Madeline, your hand is up.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can, I would like to be a part of putting this together, but I can't do it on my own here in Colombia. Because I would want to work with activists from Colombia to do so. But I was just checking the one major weapons producer for Israel and also for Colombia, where I live and Jay is at present. One of them is it's called Elbit, Elbit Systems, and since they have contracts in the US and in Colombia, it might be a good target. I just don't know what I would be capable of doing until and unless I met Colombian activists. And I know Jay is trying, and I know I'm trying, who could help with such an event here in Colombia. Secondly, just as an update for everybody, there have been a series of coup attempts against Gustavo Petro in the last couple of weeks. And part of what's happening at the same time, they haven't been successful and people are organizing against them. But at the same time, the US is putting pressure on Petro to open up access for the US to go through Colombia and attack or otherwise, bring military people into Venezuela. This has been ongoing. This attempt has been ongoing for many years. This isn't the first attempt. But there are 7 US military bases in Colombia. And this was all done before Petro, and Petro doesn't support this. So I don't know what is possible, but I'm up for trying and seeing who we might be able to bring, whom I might meet or connect with, who could help with such an action.
Okay, Jay and Steve, you still have your hands up. Do you need to speak? You want to speak again, or just forgot?
I'd like to speak again. So
Sure.
I'd just like to reiterate that I think it's really important that we do have another meeting where if we're going to grow this movement, we have to democratically decide where it's going to go. And we've got we've got to really connect with different forces that are fighting in this movement. I mean, we've got Steve Lee in Seattle. We've got Tommaso in Italy. We got folks in LA, Peter in Chicago. People are going to have to contact other groups that are in this struggle to bring them forward so we can make a meaningful date that brings in various forces. So, and on that point, Italy has been talked about, Cobas. We have Tommaso here, who I met in Bologna at a rally in November around Palestine. If he could maybe speak briefly about what is happening in Italy, there's been a lot of movement around. That's all.
Tommaso, you want to reply to that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jay. We will have an big struggle, big rally, national rally during on the 24th of February, and I can give you a link from the in which you can find the position of International Trotskyist opposition, which my party, the Communist Workers' Party, is part of, and we are collaborating with the I don't know the name. I can translate. The name is it's an association, a movement of young Palestinians. We are doing several strikes and several demonstrations in front of in many cities during these days, in front of many front of the RAI like headquarters, which is the public television. These demonstrations are very big because I think, for example, the one in Bologna has gained 1,000 people in front of the RAI, the public television. And so the next demonstration will be the one in 24 in Milan, in this national rally. As Steve said, is led by Cobas, SI Cobas. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, Steve. Did you want to speak again?
I mean, I think so. Why don't we, we can reconvene. We can call for united meeting internationally. I think getting organizations together internationally who have similar perspective and agenda is important. And we can actually have one in the United States, but people in the United States who want to work towards it. The other thing around Colombia is the role of the Zionists in supporting fascistic or right-wing governments in Latin and Central America. I put up a link to the Histadrut, the role of the AFL-CIO in South Africa, where the Histadrut, the Israeli Trading Federation, and the Zionists work with the CIA, the AFL-CIO, to support Buthelezi and support the apartheid regime. But the Zionists have been operating with the United States internationally to support right-wing governments, fascist right-wing governments, and that's something workers have to be educated about. And we're going to do that in the labor movement around Palestine. The other thing is there was an action 2 weeks ago at the San Francisco Labor Council of some workers demanding that the unions call a general strike to stop the genocide. And there's a link to that. And we have to call for action. The American workers need to take action to end the genocide. And having protests at labor councils or when the labor councils meet or labor unions meet is very important to say that the workers can take direct action in this country, and they should be taking direct action. They have the power to shut down the war machine. Workers have the power. And I think that that's something that we have to discuss further, because most organizations are not calling for a general strike or mass worker actions against the war in the United States. And that's something that I think could get support particularly among young workers. There are thousands and thousands of young workers throughout the United States and internationally, but especially in the United States, who have been energized, mobilized like nothing that I have seen since the 60s. And it's bigger than the 60s, because in the 60s, it was mainly young people, Black and brown people. Right now, you have workers organizing in the United States against the genocide in Palestine in different units. And that's why I brought up this Signal group. There are over nearly 500 healthcare workers in the Bay Area that are organizing on Signal from all different unions, interns, doctors, residents, who are organizing politically across union lines in an entire industry. And that is very significant politically. There's also development in the UAW. There's a rally that's happening also on the 25th of the ILWU, that's the 24th on the ILWU against the ILWU International. There's Angela Davis are going to be probably maybe a couple of hundred trade unionists around the issue of worker action against the war and the ILWU, which has been a leading force in stopping the shipment of ZIM's lines in the West Coast, which is an Israeli line. But ZIM is operating all over the world. maybe a protest at a Zim ship in different cities around the world. We've got to shut down Israel.
Right. I think that, you know, here in the United States, we have an abundance of targets because the US military is everywhere and the defense industry is everywhere. Defense contractors, I don't think we should limit it to people who are directly supplying arms to Israel. There is this integrated network of defense contractors, and any of the armaments contractors could be targets. So let me just say, I need a little technical help because Jay said Steve Lee had his hand up. Steve, do you have your hand up? Because I don't see you have your hand up. Or you were just, you were waving your physical hand. Do you want to speak, Steve? Lee?
No, sorry, didn't have my hand up.
Oh,
okay.
my error. I thought your hand had been up, Steve.
All right. Peter?
Yeah, for somebody like where I'm situated, but 2 points, just briefly. One is that where I'm situated from in a place like Chicago, people keep in mind that what we target it has a broader range of things that can shut down the war machine. In the 2020 Black Lives Matter protest, which was very big in Chicago, O'Hare Airport was shut down for half a day by BLM protesters and this was a working class action. Most of the people in BLM are working class. Most of the people in the streets around protesting for Palestine are working class. And there was a concerted effort to shut down O'Hare Airport, which was accomplished for half a day. If that's something like that can be pulled off in Chicago, that would make a big splash. It's not going to eliminate all arms shipments to Palestine, to Israel, and we don't. But the point is that different sorts of venues to target, but any ones that are targeted, frankly, has to be worked out with existing Palestinian organizations involved in these protests, and that's what I'm not seeing here, at least in terms of the U.S. context. So that would be what we would have to do to draw out large numbers of people, including working class people, of course, to targeted actions to try to protest the war machine for various angles. But the angles to do it from are considerable. That we don't have a ship going out from Chicago headed across the Atlantic Ocean to Israel, but we do have the military industrial complex can't function without O'Hare Airport being open.
Shirley?
Are you calling on me?
Shirley, you had your
Shirley,
hand up?
sorry.
Shirley Kessler?
Shirley, you're muted.
See, you're right, Eric. Thank you. As I listen to all of your comments, it seems to me that you're trying to do too much and reach a lot of constituents. And is it true that the main idea is this is going to be a worldwide event? Not just, it's going to be a worldwide day of protest. Is that correct? Hello?
Well, I think that what we're talking about, I think we're aiming for something that is international. I think that making an impact on the media so it gets covered, on the ruling class, what they fear the most is breaking down these national barriers. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, and that's what I think is going to be scariest to them. So we could start small. We could start with, 3, 4, 5, excuse me. Three or four or 5 events at a single day would be a great start. And then, 2 weeks from that, 10 events. If we could do that, that is going to be extremely concerning to them. as I say, what we have is a situation where for once we have an enormous amount of dry tinder. The dry tinder is millions of people, as Peter points out, millions of young people who are willing to go into action or mobilized around this. What we as a small group can help to do is coordinate this into a focused series of escalating events. I mean, I think to give credit even to a member of the union bureaucracy, the escalating strike in UAW did prove effective. And an escalating strike in a mass movement like this, history has shown can spread very rapidly, an escalating series of events. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think we should, February 28th is the day, right? And
the 24th.
The 24th, all right. Those of us who have any contact with a group that would be interested in protesting, I think should contact that group or people in that group and say, this is going to be an international day of protest. Some may be at military facilities, some may not. Some may be affiliated with labor, some may not. And I don't think at this point we need to differentiate or focus on any one. But just, I'm sorry, I don't have any contact with groups that I could mobilize, but it sounds like many of you do. And that would be a way to get something going fast for the 28th, because that seems to be the international aspect of the protest, I think is really fascinating and wonderful. But let's not be too picky about it, Let's just get it going.
Right. Well, I certainly agree with that. Eric Vandevender.
Yeah. Well, I'll sort of put forth a couple questions. One is that many of you have gone to a lot of protests in different cities. And I've noticed in the past that often these are publicized on Instagram with sort of the kinds of flyers actually that we've seen in the chat, listing a time and a place and so forth. I've never understood a centralized way to get access to that if you happen to be in a different city or if you aren't following the organizers of such and such a group. I was wondering if this has been an ongoing problem, or I don't know if it's definable as a problem, but I've experienced it since Black Lives Matter, at least. So has any progress been made on having these kinds of things? Because I would suspect there could well be protests happening in some cities on the 24th. I would never have heard about this one in Fairfax if it weren't for coming to this meeting. I'll leave it there.
Does anyone have an answer to that question?
Well, there are demonstrations going on all over the place, every city, labor, community, all kinds of groups going. So there is no national, clearinghouse or list of all events. In the Bay Area, you have Indie Bay, which is a kind of an independent media which lists all the events. But I think from our point of view, what we want to do is focus on the working class and focus on workers who are in unions and outside of unions and organize politically around worker actions, strike actions, both at workplaces and at military bases or military producers. And also the other thing is that workers are going on strike. Are there strike actions or protest actions? And what we have to fight for is that at these work actions that they actually raise the issue of Palestine, raise the issue of the military budget, and the need to fight at home against attacks on the working class are connected to the wars abroad, the trillions of dollars of war abroad. If we raise that in unions and workers say, let's talk about the money that's being spent on war. The could go to education, could go to housing. That changes the nature of this war. We have to turn the imperialist war into a civil war. That's what we have to do. And that means fighting, on a class basis to unite the working class against the genocide in Gaza and against the attack on the American working class, the American people.
Yeah, I certainly absolutely agree. The $2 trillion that go to the armaments has to become an issue for workers everywhere, especially in the United States, which is the leading spender on armaments in the world. I believe
So can I?
more than 50%. Go ahead.
I have to go pretty soon. There are a couple of things. One of them is for Colombia. There's a group called Alliance for Social Justice, and I know that they have people in Colombia. So who's ever there can get in touch with them. And I mean, they have been a force on the ground for quite a long time. The other thing is I want to follow up on my original suggestion, which was when after the 24th, Steve should report back about what happened, and then we should organize a meeting saying that, and pick a date that obviously we're not going to get the entire world to participate in this all at the same time. But if we can pick a date and explain what happened there, and then say, we need to go to, to different military bases, contractors. We think the working class should take the leadership in this, because the working class could shut this down in 5 seconds if they understand that they can just stop shipping arms. And so we can plan for one, let's say in March, let's say in the middle of March, after we find out what happened at Travis, and then we can go ahead and let people know that this is what happened, this is what people have done, and our intention is to organize people to shut the war machine down, so that we don't have to figure it out right this second, because it's impossible. Let's wait until Steve reports back, and then right after, let's say on the 25th, let's have a meeting to sort of debrief and make a decision about how we want to proceed and go forward, is what I'm saying. But also, there's a group on the ground in Colombia for anybody who wants to get in touch with those people. Alliance for Global Justice.
Right. I will take that as a semi-concrete motion, in the sense that what is being proposed, and I think that this is a consensus, is that it is premature for us, with our existing state of knowledge of what is being planned elsewhere, to set any date for action. We'll have to leave that a blank, but that we need to set a date for a much broader meeting that would have the mission of setting a date for what really is a follow-up action in coordination with the forces already in motion. So if that is basically the consensus, and I will recognize Jay and Shirley in a second, and the main thing is to set a reasonable date to organize a much broader meeting. The trade-off is A, the extreme urgency of the situation. We need to grow this movement as rapidly as possible. And B, the practicality of having enough time to organize a significantly broader meeting. So we need to come up with a date. But with that as a generalization, let me recognize Shirley. You still have your hand up. You want to speak again? And Jay. Unmute.
You're muted, sure.
I just think it's a shame if we don't do something on this national day, the 24th. Did you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we certainly could come out of this meeting urging people to participate in events that we will publicize given Steve's list. But at
Okay.
the moment, you know, it seems the consensus that we cannot practically urge other events, but we can certainly urge participation in the events that are already scheduled for those that are you know, close to those events. I would, you know, take that as a motion to urge participation. Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should support the 24th action, but related to this motion about our future meeting, and connected to Eric with a K's question about is there any kind of centralized place to find out about the multitude of these protests? Is there, I assume that there have been some attempts by the Palestinian groups to have some coordinated days of action. Does anyone know about that? If that has happened and who we could reach out to? I think they need to be brought in. I mean, with Steve, I agree the unions have to, but this movement can't be limited to the unions. They're 10% of the working class. We're going to have to bring in broader layers. So do we know of any attempts to do what we're talking about, these coordinated days of action, that if we could reach out to them to make an argument to bring in even broader forces?
Okay.
I was gonna, you know, I mean, first
Dave.
of all, you know, I think we should have a follow-up meeting. Tommaso is here, or Tommaso, he can report on what happened in Italy. And we should maybe we can invite the Japanese who participate and the Argentinians from the Workers' Party to make a report back on what happened on the 24th. That would be a good thing to do, and invite other people, you know, to participate who want to build an international global campaign around around working class action and on a global level. So I support that, and
Okay.
you know, step by step, you build where you can. I mean, there have been calls by Palestinian groups for global strike, a day of global strikes. But as we all know, just calling for a global strike doesn't make a global strike. You have to organize among workplaces, in unions, and in workers to take action. So I think what we're from our point, United Front Committee for Labor Party, we want to organize in our unions. There was an action at the San Francisco Labor Council demanding a general strike, and that needs to be publicized. Workers are demanding action by the working class to shut down the war, so that can be publicized. So I support, you know, again, supporting that action on the 24th where people can. I don't know if any rallies are being held in New York or other places around the country. There may be. Maybe we could have a statement along the, you know, along the lines of what we're calling for: international days of action, working class action to stop the war at bases, military contractors, and shipping. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Israel needs to be shut down. All the transportation and transit with Israel, and El Al is still operating in the United States. El Al is still operating in England and Colombia and all these other countries. It's an international airline. So there can be actions at El Al. I mean, there are Israeli companies all over the world. In fact, there are Israeli military defense companies internationally. So, I mean, their action can be taken there. So, I mean, I support the proposal. Have a follow-up, bring in people from around the world and in this country to talk about building this international global days of action.
Well, would March 3rd be a possible date for this follow-up meeting? That's 2 weeks from today. Again, the trade-off is between urgency and practicality. Could we bring together, as Steve says, the starting point would be report backs from the actions that take place this coming weekend, but trying to bring in larger forces you know, everybody that we can draw to that meeting. Would March 2nd, March 3rd be a possibility? If not, please suggest an alternative, because people need to be leaving, so we really should make a decision. So the two decisions are, you know, urging people to participate as possible in the 24th and setting a date for a broader meeting report back and trying to set a follow-up date of action. So my proposal is March 3rd. People should please comment either positively or negatively, and if negatively, suggest an alternative.
But March the 3rd is fine. That works. Same time.
Fine with me.
Okay. All right, then I move that we have a follow-up and report back meeting March 3rd, which we will start publicizing immediately. All in favor? Raise your little hands. Your yellow hand. Not your,
Oh, my hand is still up, sorry.
okay. Okay. I will raise my hand to demonstrate how easy it is. See? All right. All right. All right. Well, I see 9 in favor, which is a majority. Any opposed? Put your hands down. Okay. And then the second motion is that we urge everyone on the list that we have access to attend any of the events that Steve will give us a list of internationally, that they can get themselves or those that they know to, because even if we're not local to these events, some of our contacts may be local to the events. So once we have a complete list, we can be urging attendance at these events through our own networks. So all in favor of that motion, raise your hands.
No.
And Steve will send us a complete list, right, of the events?
Yes, as far as I know, the only one in the United States.
No, but the events internationally, because many of us have international content.
As far as I know, Italy, Argentina, Japan, and
Okay,
I can find out other countries.
right. But if you could, to find out the actual events so that people could participate in them, the locations and time.
Well, one comrade here from Italy is going to one in Milan.
Yeah. Okay.
Their group is connected to the call for the action, so they may know other events in Europe.
Okay. Does this event have a website, Steve?
As far as I know, they don't.
Okay.
I haven't seen it, but maybe that's something that should happen. There should be an international website in different languages.
That would be great.
All the different groups together,
Yeah.
who are and the actions. So I'll propose that.
Great. All right. Hands down. Any opposed?
No.
Okay. Shirley?
Yes, I have another comment.
Okay. So those two motions are passed, and I will immediately after this meeting send out what we have passed so that people can pass it on to their own networks. Shirley?
I am not able to go to demonstrations anymore and stand for a long time and participate in that way. And I just wonder if you have any ideas for how people like me, elderly and not all that mobile, can contribute during these demonstrations. Keep that in mind, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I think an obvious idea would be, again, if we could get a nice, simple website up. Excuse me again. If we could get a nice, simple website up, then we could have people, putting their support on specific pages of that website, so that we could have a mass, list of people. Electronically support this event, even though I can't go to it.
Yeah.
That, we could read at the event, well, there are 10,000 people who aren't present here, but, are present in spirit.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a great idea. Again, with present technology, those adept at it can actually set up these websites very quickly. Unfortunately, not all of us can qualify as adept at the latest technology. But anyone who feels that either they or they know someone who could quickly set up that website should, reply on whatever list you were contacted, either the Luxemburgist list or the other lists. And, let us all know, let Steve know, so that we could get coordination and links to existing websites that are trying to do the same thing. Because I am certain we're not the only group trying to get better coordination in this mass movement. So with that, let's call it a day. We are out of time. Right, Steve is putting his own email on that list. And all of you, your emails are available through registration. So let's call it a day. We've made progress, and we're going to reach out and build this much broader meeting, hopefully, for March 2nd, and publicize the international action for the 24th.
March 3rd, right? March 3rd, is it?
I keep saying the 2nd, I don't know why, March 3rd. It's Sunday, March 3rd, 2 weeks from today. Okay, we'll see you then. Thanks
Okay.
all for coming.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
And thanks, Peter, for the presentation.